I will now yield the floor to Monsignor Piotr Mazurkiewicz, sorry, from Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University, is going to speak about the liberal virtues versus Christian understanding of human rights. So it will be an echo of what we were discussing now. So Monsignor Mazurkiewicz is a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Warsaw and professor in Catholic social doctrine and political science at Cardinal Wyszyński University. He is a former dean of the Faculty of Social and Economic Science at the same university, and for 4 years he was a Secretary General of the Commission of Bishops' Conferences of the European Community. Since 2018, he is Editor-in-Chief of the review Christianity World Politics. Thank you very much, Monsignor.
Thank you very much. Benedict XVI, when discussing the concept of human rights proposed by Marcello Pera, he said that only reading his book, he discovered how much encyclical Pacem in Terris set a new direction in Christian thinking and had a very strong influence on Italian politics, on Christian democracy, pushing them to the left wing. So the position of Benedict XVI was that the concept of human rights made Catholic politicians left-wing politicians. And not only by defending human rights, but totally changing the ground, the point of starting point for political thinking. And Marcello Pera's position is that when the Catholic Church accepted the doctrine of human rights as a part of church magisterium and proclaimed, as we read in Gaudium et Spes, proclaimed by virtue of the gospel committed to her. So Pera is saying this way Catholic Church has fallen into a liberal trap. The issue is the doctrine of human rights a part of Christian doctrine, or is a doctrine which partially can be integrated into Catholic doctrine? So, shall the Church support the doctrine of human rights with giving an absolute approval for it, or only partially, under certain conditions? And we heard already different positions expressed by popes on liberalism, but I think there are many different currents of liberalism, and also this doctrine, this liberal doctrine, is changing with time, so that's normal. But John Gray, who is a liberal thinker, portrays liberalism as an illegitimate descendant of Christianity, and is saying that the core of the liberal doctrine is the aspiration to base historically accidental liberal practices on a foundation of principle possessing universal validity. So that by definition, liberalism has universalist claim that what is liberal is universal for every people, everywhere, all over the world. And this way is trying to delegitimize all alternative philosophies and political visions. So other concept of how the state, the society should be organized may have a relative legitimacy by virtue of being necessary stages on the way to a form of life possessing universal legitimacy. Gray is saying, for the liberal, then liberal society is not simply one of the options available to human beings, but a moral necessity. And this way, we can say that in liberal political philosophy, there is a contradiction because it proclaims tolerance and pluralism regarding the behaviors of individuals, but at the same time proclaims intolerance in the sphere of political demands. So this approach to the status of values is inconsistent in liberalism, saying that all values are relative, except liberal ones. All should be tolerated, provided that they are liberal. And Gray, as liberal, is saying, liberalism is just a political religion, nothing else. This is the core of this way of thinking, of looking on regarding the world, which means that it's very similar to a committed evangelical Christianity. Another thinker, Jewish one, Joran Hazony, is saying this is in general a character of enlightenment, because philosophers of the Enlightenment, they try to establish their own system of universal certain truths, and in that pursuit they were as rigid as the most dogmatic medievals. And if you regard liberalism as a political religion with this claim, universal claim, this means that there should be a conflict between alternative universalism, which is Catholicism. But we have to say, liberalism, it's difficult to imagine liberalism without Christianity, because it could and it did arise only within the circle of Christian civilization, and thus contains many Christian ideas, even if some of them were really transformed by this philosophy. So my position is that liberalism as an auxiliary social and political ideology played till now a very useful role, reminding us, among other things, of the importance of individual freedom, the limitations of the role of the state in social and economic life, on validity of contracts, and so on and so on. But contemporary problems with liberalism are closely related with the fact that this philosophy took a dominant position in political life, in political thinking, and to this assumption of responsibility for the whole life of the community, or liberalism was not prepared or is not suited to play this role. When we regard the church reading since the beginning of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have to say they were 4 objections. one, that there is no reference to God. That the second one, this was a question of individualism. So community is not present in this declaration. The third, that the declaration of human duties is missing. And the fourth, that due to this, especially the first objection, that this doctrine is can be misused by multiplication and creative reinterpretation of human rights. And this provoked also that Pius XII, when the declaration was approved, never mentioned this declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in his teaching. He took a word on this before, but never after its approval. And when we are talking about this reference to God, it's not about some devotional appeal, but about the invocation or omission of a word that fundamentally changes the meaning of the entire declaration. In 1947, Pius XII wrote a letter to American President Harry Truman. In this letter, he's saying, once the state, to the exclusion of God, makes itself the source of the rights of the human person, man is forthwith reduced to the condition of a slave, of a mere civic commodity to be exploited for the selfish aims of a group that happens to have power. That's a very strong message. If you omit the reference to God, in the future, states will use the whole doctrine of human rights to transform citizens into slaves. That's 1947. So we have the doctrine of human rights, but the source of human rights is invaluable human dignity in church reading, and the source of this dignity is the fact that man was created on the image and likeness of God. So this man as image of God is sacred. Whoever attacks, whoever says against man, against human dignity, speaks directly against God in church reading. The reference to God reminds us also of the basic limitation of political power. So, political power is not God and cannot ascribe to itself divine prerogatives. The source of human dignity is transcendent to political power. So, the temporal power encounters an impossible limit which it does not itself establish. God is the creator of human nature, and through this, of natural law, also called by John Paul II moral grammar. Today, we experience the temptation to dismiss the idea of God as a no longer necessary byproduct of the evolution of the human race. However, the consequence of going beyond the paradigm of creator and creation is to call into question the very idea of human nature, and thus also the moral norms common to all human beings and unalterable. Morality becomes a product of humans, a product which is produced for a certain purpose. It means should play a role of an instrument. But once human beings decided to change the purposes they set to themselves, so we can say that this morality, these moral rules also should be changed. That's a thinking of Rorty, who said that this whole moral philosophy was just an instrument established by our grandfathers for the purpose they had. We change the purposes, we should change the rules. In this moment, one can say replacing the theology of creation with the ideology of evolution makes the very idea of human nature fluid. Also the category of truth is a truth only at a certain stage of human history. We know the famous expression, a woman is not born, a woman is made. Today, we are saying man, human beings are not born. They are made by themselves, by the society. And this means also that the assumption to think as if there would be no God comes to the assumption as if nature would not be created. I'm not talking about the theory of evolution. There's a very good book written by Thomas Nagel, Mind and Cosmos. He is discussing exactly this problem from the point of view of an atheist. That there is an ideology also which is strictly against the theology of creation. St. Augustine is making many references to the hierarchy of created beings. He writes, "For a great thing truly is man, made after the image and similitude of God, not as respect the mortal body in which he is clothed, but as respect the rational soul, but which he has exalted in honor above the beasts. Man is therefore below the angels and above the beasts. Although, due to the primordial sin," and that's another quotation from St. Augustine, we sometimes disregard this hierarchy, and more is often given for a horse than for a slave. Today, we can say that this disregard is, for example, the proclamation of the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Animals, on the model of the Declaration of Human Rights. But also the whole discussion if this evolution is not on a stage that human beings should take the whole responsibility for the direction of the evolution and decide freely who should be human being, or if human being is worth to prolong his existence on this world in a current form, or maybe it's better to transform him into a post-human being. So, for example, Braque is saying that with this kind of philosophy, we are capable to produce material, cultural, and moral goods. But at the same time, we are unable to explain in what sense a good is the very existence of man. So why should we take care for human being and for the preservation of human nature. And Benedict XVI is pointing out another consequence of this lack of reference to God, saying, today it is customary to treat the secular vision of human rights, or ordo naturalis in general, as a certain close, complete system. God and religion are completely needless in this system. The popular image of the relationship between the order of nature and supernatural order evokes, and that's a comparison by Wojciech Giertych, a Dominican, evokes the image of a double-decker London bus. At the bottom is the engine, driver, conductor, and some circular passengers. At the top, there are passengers interested in spiritual life. Mostly priests, nuns. Perhaps looking through the windows of this upper deck, they see more, but they have no influence, neither on the direction of the bus, neither on the speed. So they are completely useless in this bus. And Benedict XVI is writing, that's a quotation, if the ordo naturalis is seen as a complete and not needed gospel totality, there is a danger that what is properly Christian ultimately appears as unnecessary superstructure over man's natural being. So if we completely reject the public importance of religious justification of morality, for example, even in the indirect means derived from the private faith of individual citizens, then the question arises, for what reason should people respect human rights? And in general, why should they obey the law? If we are unable to say anything certain about right and wrong, or we find this a topic of no interest at all. So what then is the primary regulator of social life? If natural reason is supposed to be free of history, tradition, and experience, is it capable of giving us an answer to the question what we are to do in this concrete place and time, and not only in an abstract reality? What is the ultimate rationale of this society? Leszek Kołakowski is saying that in such a case, people just are afraid of the law and of the punishment they face if they disobey the law. In a neutral secular reality, it is not necessary for people to be convinced that such behavior is morally right. It is sufficient that they do what the state expects them to do. And the state is out of concern why people obey the law. So Kołakowski is saying totally secular society. He's using a name, radically liberal state, is or will be based on fear. And this state will be unstable. So that the society organized such a way as absolutely neutral, and for this reason based on fear, can alive just a while. There is an idea which was proposed by the German professor Robert Spemann, who is saying, is a free society without religion imaginable? he said, we don't have such an experience. But today, the Western world exists and as word with freedom due to the fragrance from the empty bottle. So if this fragrance will disappear, freedom will disappear also from our societies. And the last idea here is, I think that this is very important in the thinking of Ratzinger, that all this radical liberalism is based on a concept of naked nature. So that something is universal, absolutely universal, because we understood the rules of naked nature, which has any link to the tradition, culture, religion. And Benedict is saying, but such a cognition does not exist. So everything which we are teaching at this university, another university, and so on, is always a mixture of this, what is natural and what is cultural. And it's important to understand this, because if we will say we catch the naked nature, it means we neglect totally the role of culture and religion. And this naked nature, as in this liberal sense, can exist only due to the remnants of Christian culture. So that's also the reason why this reference to God is so important even today in the whole doctrine of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monsignor, for this very interesting reflection about the term of liberalism, which can be also seen as because there is a problematic dimension of that between Europe and the US, like liberalism and progressivism, because liberalism can be also understood as, like the historical term, separation between the religion and the state. And I'm thinking about Pope Benedict XVI, who said even in Liberare la libertà, to free freedom, that liberalism was originally intrinsically connected to Christianity, because it is the Christian apprehension of the world with respect to Islam, for instance, which sees the society as a whole. But then, at some point, liberalism took its distance from Christianity, and that in this regard, liberalism as such, when it's disconnected from Christianity, is condemned to die. And there is a very interesting book by philosopher Vittorio Possenti, who was very close friends with Pope Benedict. Pope Benedict quotes him all the time, Le società liberali al bivio, liberal societies at a crossroad, that explains that our liberal societies are condemned because they cut themselves from Christianity, which I think is very interesting, and it's important. And thank you for giving the definitions of progressivism, where you made the difference between the original definition of what is liberalism, like the idea of a limited state, the respect for contracts, and progressivism with all the terrible consequences that you just mentioned, because at some point these interesting philosophies just took their distance from Christianity. So it was very interesting. Thank you very much.